let's talk about cults. Specifically, the new kind of cult you need to look out for, especially if you are an empath, a starseed, a gifted kid, or an artist, entertainer, or a comedian. So let's get into it. First of all, we've talked about the entertainment industry and Hollywood programming in many of my videos. And I don't think I'm alone when I say that there's something really off about Hollywood right now. And the everyday people are starting to wake up and notice it. We're seeing celebrities that look like they're turning into clones and being replaced. Some question whether or not they may actually be aliens and reptilians. Not to mention that I think fame is dying. At least the influence that Hollywood stars once had over people, it's no longer what it once was. And I think we can see that because of the last election we had. We had Kamala Harris, who really relied on endorsements from celebrities during her campaign. And a lot of people saw right through that. So if Hollywood is dying and the elite or the shadow government or whatever you want to call them is still trying to maintain control of society or have influence over our consciousness and our spiritual awakening on the planet, they're probably getting smart. So don't you think that they are also seeing on some level what's happening in Hollywood and that they may just shift their, not technique. They may shift their strategy to start to target more people like micro influencers. And this is where the danger lies, especially if you are a creative. So this is going to fall into podcasters, artists, especially musicians, especially podcasters, because podcasters and podcasting is becoming the way that people get their information these days. So Hollywood stars, comedians, because there's been a popularity in comedy over the last handful of years. More and more people, you're seeing more everyday comedians out there and people trying comedy. And then acting and musician. And of course, there's always going to be those people who are still trying to break out into Hollywood because, either because they've worked so hard for it and they don't see the corruption, or they don't care, or they've been groomed for it their whole lives by their families. I don't know. But I just want to point out that when we start to see specific celebrities rise to fame overnight, like you don't even see that they had any kind of following or any kind of social media presence, and just out of nowhere, boom, they're on the scene. Suddenly their music video is the #1 chart. Their face is all over romantic comedies and Netflix. I can think of somebody in particular that just started popping up everywhere. I don't want to say his name because I'm not trying to get in trouble over here, but a specific male celebrity is starting to pop up in a lot of movies. And one of his movies that he was into, or that I noticed, that was one of his first movies, was with Kevin Hart. And of course, I'm only speculating here and regurgitating things that I've heard on the internet. But there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there that say Kevin Hart is one of them. But again, just alleged, just speculation. I'll let you think on that one for yourselves. But anyways, I just thought it was interesting that this person just so happened to be in, their big breakout role in that movie, and then now they're the star of a lot of romantic movies are on Netflix right now. So another side note, Netflix is, if I'm not mistaken, I just saw a video the other day that was saying the people that own Netflix are, I can't remember. I can't remember if it was just talking about how basically the main movies that they promote on Netflix are horror movies or some like demonic in nature. So all of that to say, there's corruption going on in Hollywood, but I'm here to tell you that it's also trickling down the pyramid into your everyday comedy shows, entertainment business, podcasting, series, etc. And one of the things I specifically wanted to talk about is the rise of the New Age cult. So I'm not attacking the New Age movement. I need to make that clear. I'm just saying that as certain ways of thinking rise in popularity, not only are we'll call them they, targeting people using the usual ways to influence people through Hollywood and the streaming services and movies, but I mean, most people aren't even going to movies anymore. A lot of people are just staying at home streaming movies. And then there's a lot of people on the planet waking up who want to support more local art and comedy. So as I was saying, rise of all of these new things might encourage some people on the lower levels of the pyramid, the worker bees, the ones on the ground level who are getting in there trying to influence consciousness, and just manipulative people in general, because we also have to acknowledge the fact that some of these people who are out there trying to start cults and recruit people into sketchy organizations aren't always from bloodline families or working for some kind of, religious entity or organization. Sometimes it's mentally ill people who are alone, they've been bullied, they've probably been brainwashed or controlled on some level, which is why that maybe while they were in hiding and not having friends and hating their lives, they watched a lot of stuff on social media and they became enthralled with cult leaders and murder mysteries, and they started to become very attracted to this idea that some person who was nothing could suddenly wake up and have all of this mental control over people. So can you see how that might be, oh my God, I have something in my eye. But can you see how that might be something that somebody who's mentally unwell and hurting on the inside might be inspired by? Then they might try to go and start their own cult. So when I think back to my experiences in the entertainment industry, I always ask myself, I'm like, I don't know if it was the experience I just described where lonely, crazy, psychopathic person with a tough past watched too many shows on Netflix and TV and thought that they could try influence other people and start their own cult in the local comedy scene. Or was this person a real magician, a real warlock, and they were working with a bloodline family? I don't know. So I'm not sure if I'm the only one who's ever come across a situation like that. I'd be so curious to hear if anybody else has ever been targeted by a person like that or organization like that. But back to the New Age kind of cults that we want to watch out for. So we've also talked about, I believe, the idea of religious unity on my channel, because that seems to also be one of the agendas that is being pushed out there in the media, on the world stage. In politics, we see, I think the sun's going to be too bright over there, but we see just, I guess, Charlie Kirk, the elephant in the room. What's going on with that? The second he changed his mind about how he felt about a specific state overseas or nation overseas, all of a sudden he is assassinated. And now we've got some weird stuff going on with his wife, Erica Kirk, and all the rumors going around that she was his handler, and that there's other rumors going around that they're somehow going to try to get her together with J.D. Vance, and since his wife isn't a Christian and Erica is, that maybe they'll unite together. And I don't really know because I don't really follow the politics narrative, but I do see a lot of religious programming lately, and it seems like they're trying to make it more mainstream. And then the other strange things, you'll even start to notice things like the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, the remake of that, and then how they cast people who have, let's just say, they resemble demons with either their fingernails or some of their attire that they were wearing. Like, it looked a little bit demonic. That's what I'm just telling you, what other people have been saying, because I did not watch it, but this is kind of something that people are starting to wake up to and notice. So a lot of people have been questioning whether or not Christianity and all that whole, Christianity, if it's been taken over by the other side or inverted by, I guess, Satanists or whatever. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. But another thing that I've also noticed has kind of come up in the media a handful of times, or more lately, is the cult of Jared Leto, the supposed cult of Jared Leto. So he supposedly has people come out to his private island and they wear white and they do things that make it seem like they're in a cult. And then there's a lot of women coming forward and former stars who acted with him formerly, saying that he's had some really bad behavior on set and he's really inappropriate towards women. So you have that. Then you have, I don't know if this so much falls into the category of like religious cults, but you have the American Apparel documentary came out, and the American Apparel cult. So you can see how that kind of ideology can also overcome the fashion industry and influence a whole brand of people by telling them what is cool. And if you look at some of the corruption in that industry, it's a similar story. The guy who owned it, there was a lot of women that came forward and said that he was inappropriate with them also. And then if you look at the advertisements that they had for their clothing, it was very graphic and sensual in nature. So it kind of is like, well, that's kind of what they're showing you in their ads, so I'm not surprised there. And then we have, I'm thinking of Charles Manson. This was quite a while ago, but the kind of new age cults that might be inspired by someone like him, who is fed up with the current system, and all the other people are too. So he's coming in and he's essentially feeding people the ideas that they want to hear, and he's giving them something else to believe in by attacking the current organizations that are in power and whatnot, and preying on these ideas that people have and this distrust that they may have in their government or their politics. And then he's preying on that and seeding information in their head and encouraging them to act in certain ways that make them end up committing murders. So helter skelter and all that stuff. And then of course, I just thought of another one in pop culture. Jay Shetty. I have not really watched a lot of his content, but I remember when I was having a spiritual awakening, his face was everywhere. And now it's coming out that he was also maybe inappropriate with people. I don't know if it was with women or if it's just in general. And again, this is all speculation. So this is just what people are saying on media, and I'm not here to spread any rumors that are not in truth, because I'm also recognizing that social media, lies can be spread on there, and if they spread far enough, people can think that they're true. So I don't want to spread any false narratives. But when we're looking at cults as a whole and whatnot, you just start to see this pattern where you have usually a man. I'm not saying females can't do this either. And you may even know of an example where there was like a female cult leader, but typically what I have seen is like a man, and he knows how to speak to people. He knows what they're fed up about. He knows enough about these new age ideologies that he can say things like love, unity, peace, but he can frame it in a way that is still disempowering to the individual, or that somehow encourages bad behavior. And I want to give you a couple examples of that. So in my personal experience, I came across a group of people who recruited me to work for an organization when I was breaking out into the comedy scene and the podcasting world. So I had done one comedy show about 8 months prior, and I didn't go back and want to do comedy because my first experience with the show was that the producer was an a-hole. He was inappropriate, and it seemed like he only booked me because he wanted to take me on a date in private. And then the second I said I wasn't interested, he got all bitchy and didn't want to. And I think he still let me be on the show, but he was just, his whole demeanor changed and it creeped me out. And then he would come back and apologize and say, oh, I'm sorry, you're so talented. I've just been lonely for a while and I haven't dated anybody in a while. So I just get frustrated sometimes, but you're cool. Like, I didn't mean to make you feel that way. So it was a lot of like gaslighting and back and forth manipulation where it's like, I'm going to take you off the show if you don't go on a date with me. And then coming back and like, oh my God, that was wrong of me. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. And anyways, I decided right then and there that I didn't want to deal with him. So I took a step away from comedy. Then about 8 months later, contacted on social media on my comedy page and invited by somebody else to be on their podcast. So because at that point, this is where we have to watch out for our own, like what's going on with us, because at the time I was in a very lonely state. I had just gotten out of a relationship not long before that, and I was in a space where I was just like, I just want to work with people and be creative with people. And I was kind of bummed that the other comedy thing didn't work out. So I was looking for basically other people to work with that weren't trying to bang me. And I found somebody. I found a friend who seemed innocent enough, asked me to be on his podcast. Our first meeting together was good for me. We talked about astrology, and that's how we bonded, by talking about a lot of these new age concepts and things, conspiracy topics that we agreed on. So we started doing improv comedy together, eventually make my way into being on more comedy shows and other people's podcasts. And those worlds, at least in the state or the city that I was in, they were kind of merging together in that scene. So basically, if you're doing comedy at a bar or music at a bar, you're going to meet people in other industries, whether they're a local podcaster who is popular in the scene, or they are a comedian as well, or they are a musician, because it's kind of the entertainment industry. There's a lot of overlap there. So eventually we got into producing comedy shows. And when I look back on it, it's so interesting because, as I've mentioned in other videos, we also talk about, in one of my last videos about handlers, it's called Do You Have a Handler? Part 2, AI Recruitment, recruiting through AI and technology. And this idea that everything about us is basically out there. When you're sharing your content on social media, when you're, walks like this, me sharing my philosophies on life right now, like anybody, if I'm not protective of my energy, people could be watching this and they could be studying me and profiling me. And if I was a target or a person of interest that they, may be interested in using in some way, like recruiting to help them, then I'm putting it all out there for them right now. But we also have AI algorithms that connect us to certain people based on what we click on, what we're into, etc. But social media profiling is the big thing if you've got your stuff out there on social media. So for all I know, maybe this person wasn't into astrology or conspiracy. A really, truly manipulative person, they could essentially see what you're into as an individual. And like I said, if you're important enough that they want to recruit you for whatever reason, they can use those things they learned about you online to start up a conversation, to build rapport. So one of the things that was also out there all over my social media was the idea that I wanted to build an animal sanctuary, an eco village, and had worked with dogs at an animal shelter. So they told me about their idea of this utopian kind of egalitarian organization and how they wanted to get comedians and musicians and people together to put on these big comedy shows, and it would be a great way to build community and make money and all this stuff. And you can you can set up your animal sanctuary stuff and your jewelry there, and it could be a way for you to make income too, and eventually start saving up money so you can do that. And if we get enough people to do our comedy shows, and we can build this eco village. So I was sold on the idea. I'm like, that sounds dope. Like, yeah, let's get a community together and do art and fun stuff, and eventually, start creating new systems that we actually want to be a part of in society, not just these, concrete jungles. So I think there's probably a lot of people who are interested in the homesteading route and moving away from cities. So again, if I were somebody targeting people and I, was a shadow elite person trying to keep the money and control in my hands, then I would shift and I would say, okay, all these people want to do homesteads, so how can we control that? Maybe we can be the ones to build the homesteads, but we got to recruit the people. So this is where we need to be careful and watch out. This is what I learned the hard way. A lot of people can say the right things. They can even, on some level, do the right things. They can speak the right things. They can get people together and talk about love and unity. They can name the same creators that you are into and make it seem like they have all the same philosophical beliefs, etc. But if we're not paying attention to the ideals that they're promoting, that's where this can get dangerous. And this is the subtle manipulation that's going on behind the scenes that people need to be aware of, especially when you're getting involved in the entertainment industry or any kind of group or organization. And I feel like this might be popular in new age spiritual communities and also rave concerts, because side note about raves, in the Monarch programming manuals, Monarch programming is an alleged offset of MK Ultra, and it's another form of mind control. But in the manuals, again, this is alleged, but they talk about flashing lights as being part of programming, and then they have like 4 pages talking about substances that they use in combination with that to program people. So when I would say, not saying that everyone involved in this kind of stuff is bad, but if we are, I feel like it's important to kind of be mindful of what you're participating in and who's running it. What are their values? What are their goals? What are their ambitions? Are their actions mirroring what they're talking about? Or are they saying all the pretty language and they're talking about healing and unity and love, yet they are manipulating people behind their back? They are talking mad shit about the people around them. They are encouraging substance abuse everywhere and encouraging people to have orgies and calling it free love and empowerment. Well, let me just tell you, I can't think of anything that is more of a satanic or demonic agenda. And I used to think that I believed in free love, but when it's being used in the wrong way, it's another form of energy siphoning and energy harvesting and trauma bonding with other people. Because every time you open your energy field to share it with somebody else, whether or not you're trying to connect with them and whether or not you have a casual attitude about it, we take on their demons. And this is so obvious to me when you look at the sea of people and the types of people who are still single, who are out there in those pools of dating, and the type of values that all these people have. Especially if you're in a bigger city, I would imagine like Scottsdale, Phoenix, LA, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, I don't know, some of these bigger cities, Denver probably, Nashville probably, like the big cities where people flock because they're interested in the entertainment industry or the rave scene or whatever they're interested in. I imagine that there's, and I've experienced that typically in those industries and in those worlds, there's more single people because more people are focused on becoming something. They're focused on their own fame and success. So they still may be getting it on and casually dating, but they're not typically not in long-form relationships. So what's happening with that? You have a whole crew of people who are essentially narcissists. And again, doesn't always, just because somebody's interested and ambitious about a career doesn't automatically mean that they're full-blown narcissists, but depending on what your goals with fame are you trying to gain a platform because you want people to say, oh, good job, Alex, I like you, I love you, we see you? Or are you trying to get a platform because you want to make an impact on the world? You want to share your art with the world and change them in a positive way. And you want a voice, or you want money or platform so you can build these structures for people who can't afford, affordable housing and whatnot. Are you working so you can have an end goal? Like, what are you going to do with your money and your platform when you reach desired fame? Are you going to help the animals? Are you going to funnel it into maybe up and coming politics who would actually do something for the people and not continue to exploit them? Versus, the dime a dozen musicians that think they're going to make it big in Hollywood or Nashville or some of these bigger cities. And then you ask them, well, like, what's the motivation behind it? And there's literally no motivation. And these are the types of people who are at risk because they're often so desperate to be seen. And a lot of the desperation from wanting to be famous so bad is coming from trauma and wounding. So these people are the perfect targets for groomers and handlers and cult leaders to come try to target them, to get them to do their bidding, because they'll do anything to be famous. They'll do anything to be seen. And if they don't have strong values in their music already, then they can often be manipulated into creating a new narrative. Is that a bug? It's so sunny. But they can be manipulated into sharing somebody else's narrative. So now take that and multiply it by like hundreds of people that you're going to come across when you're in the entertainment industry, and they're all single. They don't want to be partnered up because they have their own goals and they don't want to lose their own career, or they're likely sleeping with people to get ahead because it's going to be good for their career. So a guy, for example, or a woman who wants somebody to be on their podcast that has a lot of monthly viewers, but in order to be on the podcast, it is implied that you either have to go on a date with them or you have to hook up with them in some way to get on there. So there's definitely a lot of that stuff happening in your local comedy scene, and especially probably on some of these bigger podcasts. I'm not saying every podcast is corrupt. I'm just saying this is something to be mindful of. And this is why it's so important to build your intuition and your discernment, spiritual discernment. But my point of saying all that is that you've got all these people like this. So when bugs. So when ideologies like free love and just, orgies or whatever these people are into, group experiences, it's like, what better time to energy harvest? And then you think of like Burning Man and some of the stories that people say, like, nah, dude, like, it's all about love and unity. We just did a group like thing where we all finished at the same time, and it was like this group thing, and it was so spiritual and like godly. I can't with that because I'm just like, oh man, just what I'm seeing a lot of people who are repeating words and ideologies that they've heard from somebody else, and then they are like literal walking NPCs that at a lot of times seem soulless because they're under the influence of psychedelics, of synthetic substances, of alcohol, of marijuana. And it's just another example of how the theys of the world have inverted something that started off probably as something more positive. So you can start to see how a lot of these ideologies that are painted to look one way, once you get into the experience with these groups of people, and maybe you start participating in those things yourself because you don't know any better, because you're also under the influence of these things, and you're also naively seeking fame or platform and not really knowing why you're doing it. this is all part of mass mind control. So I'm not immune to that either. I was a human, and at one point in time before I really knew myself and I really knew and dug deep within myself and my purpose in this lifetime, I was absolutely a victim also of trauma conditioning, of mind control, of wanting to be famous but not knowing why. And that's something I feel like was planted in my mind at an early age, especially being in part of the Gifted and Talented program, where they grow up telling you you're special, you're a leader, you're here to lead people. And then also being pushed to do plays and stuff when I was little, and a ton of public speaking. That was like my thing as a kid. And I remember the only Gifted and Talented memory I actually really have that's vivid was doing this preteen America. They said it wasn't a beauty pageant. They said it was a leadership pageant where you had a special, you had to share a special talent, and then you had to do a speech, and then you attended a conference for 3 days, and then you had like an evening gown. So it kind of was about your beauty dress too, but all of that stuff, you know, does something to the psyche too. I know I'm not the only child that was groomed in a way for some kind of entertainment or stardom or whatever. So the other question I have is like, well, did I want to be famous because of like all these teachers and parents and whatnot, like pushing me down that path and encouraging me? Is it some type of monarch programming? Is it just me observing society and looking at celebrities as ideals, my idols, and deciding that I want to be like them? I don't know. Is this unconscious? Is this conscious? Is this a soul memory of what I'm supposed to do in this lifetime? Again, I don't know, but I know for periods of my life when I was not sober and was not in control of my energy field or my destiny, I absolutely fell victim to this stuff. And then thank God I woke up from it, because that's how I know how not to do it today, and how I know that it's not fulfilling, and why I'm inspired to talk about it with other people, because I think it eats away at your soul. And when I was involved with the group, I think it's very, it's something that's very human in all of us. Like, we want to be a part of something. We want to be a part of a group, even if we are loners. And I'm like, have been the biggest loner for most of my life. I've always been social and have had a few close friends, but I very much am like a lone wolf. Like, I can hang out with the pack, or I'm like hunting on my own. I was gonna say, I don't want to share my personal details too much on here, because you never know who's watching. But anyways, just saying, a lone wolf. A lot of us are lone wolves in this day and age, because social media kind of makes us that way. So social media makes us that way. And then when we feel what it's like to be part of something, we have that sense of belonging, it can be really easy to get swept away by the group thinking. And another word for this is pendulums, which I've talked about in other videos. Pendulums are a concept talked about in the book Reality Transurfing by Vadim, Zeland, Reality Transurfing. And it's essentially a thought form, a giant thought form that becomes an entity of its own, because it's these collective thought forms. And because it's a thought form, it has a balance of energy. There's always a polarity. So there's the opposite end of it and then the positive side of it. So these pendulums are often swinging in one direction or another. And because they're so powerful and so many people have their energy directed towards the pendulum, it can start to overcome the individual. And that's what's happening in politics. That's what's happening when there's big controversies in the media about ideologies or politics or whatever it is. And you get people who start to sound like NPCs because they're repeating the same scripts that other people are repeating. And that's a perfect example of a pendulum in action. So all that to say, when we get a small taste of what it feels like to belong, it's very easy to get swept away by the ideologies of a group. So I guess I'm here to remind people that if you find yourself getting involved in these group events, whether that is the rave scene, if that is Burning Man, if that's some kind of new age movement, it could even be some kind of young life or Christian movement. And again, not saying that all these or any of them are bad, but there's always going to be the bad apple. So somebody who takes a good thing and then they twist it and they manipulate it to fit a negative narrative. So there's definitely people out there who can infiltrate these types of systems because they see the success of these types of group organizations and they say, now, wouldn't it be fun to manipulate people? Wouldn't it be fun to take all these people who are going down one path, and if I'm smart enough and I use their language, I can kind of change the direction of the herd. So how do we know that someone's not guiding us to a slaughter? The important thing first of all, the most important thing is your intuition, because your spiritual discernment is going to tell you. So whether or not it's actively telling you, or if it's something that you look back on and you're like, dang, when I first met that person, I felt that gut feeling about them that it wasn't right. And now my intuition, their actions have proven to me that my intuition was right. But if you do that enough times, that's how intuition is built in the first place. Like I think we are born in this world and a lot of it gets programmed out of us and conditioned out of us. And then we get gaslit. And I just made a video about this yesterday, like how a lot of monarch programming, what we see in the monarch programming manuals, mirrors psychological conditioning that is happening widespread today. So more and more people have these kind of wounds, and more people are walking around mostly unconscious, and then they lose touch with their intuition. It's not like we're born and then we go to school and it's like, this is how you communicate with the earth. This is how you communicate with yourself through meditation. This is how you do blah, blah, blah. However, as I just said that, I realized that they did have nap time in elementary school. So that is still kind of like a question to me, because I don't think I remember learning the power of meditating and sitting with yourself. I think they played guided meditations, and I did a video on this the other day too. If they were using content inspired by Robert Monroe, which was about brainwave entrainment, which is what the gateway tapes was, that can have crazy effects on adults. I could not find any real studies of children under 7 who use brainwave entrainment, but tell me why so many gifted and talented kids or kids from the 80s and the 90s remember hearing the gateway tapes in school as part of your standard hearing test. So whether or not that is something called schema, where we hear something that sounds familiar enough so we associate those things together, whether it's that or if they were actually playing those tapes for us but it was more of like a secret experimental thing to see the effects on them. There's a lot of evidence, or there is, theories that the way that this could affect young minds are kind of like staggering, like emotional dysregulation. So think about it. Your body was designed to naturally be in specific states, at different ages. But then we're born into this world where we grow up in front of a screen, and then we've got these tapes played for us, and they're not consistent in how they're being played for us, but they're literally forcing your brain to be in a different kind of brainwave. So over time, that can literally train your body and your energy field to be in a state of hypervigilance, of restlessness, of what was the other one? To have chronic anxiety and emotional dysregulation. So if you want to see the video about that, I think it was called The Real Impact of the Gateway Tapes. And I will link it in the description of this. As I always link my playlists and videos that you can watch in my description or at the end of the video, related videos. So anyways, the impact of the gateway tapes, if that's in fact what we were listening to, brainwave entrainment, then that means we've got a generation of people who grew up feeling emotionally dysregulated, looking for some kind of community and communion, because we also grew up in the world of the internet where we have the illusion of communion and community, but it's from behind a computer. So we are looking for some sense of belonging, and then we're finding it at these places where they're playing flashing lights, and then they're behind those flashing lights, they're putting things on the screen like images of war, images of tsunamis, and images of natural disasters. Like that's part of humanity. But to me, that's like literal, straight from the book, MK Ultra, monarch programming, literally what we see in movies when they are programming someone in a movie with the flashing lights, and they're doing it in the music that we listen to. And then we're singing this music on repeat, we're playing it after the concert ends, and then we're continuing to do these habits that we pick up from these concerts or from, our social conditioning drinking, going to the bar every weekend. Now dispensaries are, legalized. So now you can go to the dispensary and get your MJ. So one of the reasons I quit is because an article came out like a year and a half ago about the levels of pesticides in dispensary products, and they were like way over the legal limit. And I thought to myself, like, something is off about this stuff. Like, not that I don't remember ever having anything like clean or natural, but I'm just saying that when I was involved in that lifestyle, there's definitely a lot of instances of paranoia, which seemed to sync me to the timelines, because again, I believe in like a holographic universe theory. I believe that we're creating our own realities. I believe it's our emotional frequency that connects us to different realities. And I believe in concepts from the book Reality Transurfing by Vadim, Zeland, where our emotions kind of guide us onto these different timelines. So I think that using those products, if they were putting me in an anxious state, I think it was just connecting me to these timelines where I was in a lower vibrational state mentally and emotionally. There was some paranoia caused from that stuff. And then before I knew it, I'm on this timeline where all these people are manipulating me, and there's black magic, and there's hexes, and there's curses, and then there's people who literally passed away, like who were part of this group that I was a part of. I heard people call these comedy shows rituals. And again, because I was under the influence myself and didn't know how to really fully trust my intuition or my boundaries back then. So I'm open about the fact that when they found me, I was portraying a comedic character who would do anything to get famous. And mostly I was making fun of people like that. So it's like provocative art and satire. But if somebody, maybe they took it seriously, maybe on some level back then, I don't know, would I have done anything to be famous? Like, I don't know. Not anymore, absolutely not anymore. But I'm just saying, maybe they thought that I would, and maybe that's why I was targeted to be part of this group. And I feel like I was being used as a honeypot to get people into the organization. And then after the first show, just some sketchy stuff going on, and people talking about magic, and then literally feeling like I had demonic entities follow me to my home. But again, because of the substances out there, I also can't write off the fact that it wasn't an effect from these everyday products. So that's also something that people, especially targeted individuals, should look out for. So if you're a person who's consuming these products thinking, it's helping me sleep, it's helping me recover from trauma and illness, how do we know it's not contributing to that paranoia and that feeling of being targeted? It absolutely can, in my experience, because when I quit all of that, the targeting stopped, and I was able to separate myself from the group, from those individuals, completely stepped away from the comedy scene. I haven't done any live shows or production in over a year, and my show Starletta has been a little bit on pause while I kind of figure out what direction I'm going to go with that. And I think I kind of want to play aliens or do something cool with that. I don't know, but still kind of taking a break from that while I focus on this podcast, which is really, honestly, has been my passion for the last decade. My Statements by Alex, which is my astrology readings, my remote viewing tarot sessions, my human design blueprint teachings. Like, all this stuff is stuff that lights up my soul, because all those tools, ultimately at the end of the day, were tools that helped me get out of that situation as well. They helped me understand that, especially when I was going through the period of relapsing on alcohol and just being a part of the gang of the comedy show. Like, if you ever go to a comedy show or you're a musician, like, you can't escape that stuff. I mean, you can maybe if you're hanging out with other sober people, but like, for the most part, I mean, there's comedians on stage with the whiskey in their hand doing crowd work. Like, what are you guys drinking? Can I get somebody to buy me a drink up here? So it's like very much engraved in the culture, not to mention the musicians that also do that. And not to mention the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll, ideology of the rock stars that a lot of us have also been conditioned to kind of aim for in our life. Like, we glamorize that whole movement. So yeah, it's all part of the culture. But that's one of the reasons why I always promote sobriety, is because it helped me, again, get away from these people. It got mental clarity back, so I was able to see through the manipulation. So again, whether or not it is tying us to lower level timelines and making us vibrational matches for these types of people, and literally making us shift to realities where there is cult leaders and grooming and handlers and conditioning and magic and curses and hexes and the bad things that happen, if you know, like the Me Too movement type stuff, like all that stuff happens in the entertainment industry, and it could absolutely be substances that we are consuming that are tying us to those timelines and making us have a hard time trust our intuition. So that's just one view I have on it. And then I also think that there's something to be said about being a creative person, being a person who is ambitious, being a person who, you know, thinks differently, who is good at rallying people together, or like talking to people in a way where they're like working with people one-on-one, for example. Like I can see why somebody might have had interest in me being a co-president, because I was already doing this kind of work. However, I feel like in that experience, because I wasn't conscious at the time, even though I still had good intentions, like I wasn't conscious enough. And that was like the biggest lesson that I needed to learn spiritually. And then I was able to, when I was doing my healing, I took a step back from all this, I was looking into my astrology chart and my human design chart, specifically my astrology site chart though. And it's so crazy because the transit that I was going through was a Scorpio transit, and Scorpio transits are so powerful in helping you tap into your personal power, and they can also attract people who have power struggles against you, essentially. And I remember I also had some Saturn transits, and Saturn, you've heard me talk about modern programming and the manuals for programming, they talk about how those occult organizations worship Saturn. So I don't know, it's so wild, because Saturn in astrology is the archetype of Father Time, our relationship with authority figures, with father figures. So it was like at that time that my soul was going through this Saturn return type experience where it was in a specific part of my chart, and I also had a lot of Plutonian energy and Scorpio energy. It's like my chart literally represented what was happening in my physical life. So it kind of put it out there in a different language that I could understand through the lens of astrology. And I was able to see that it was a timeline. The timeline passed. It was only like during the eclipse portals that that energy was really being activated in my life. And so wild, like the reason I'm such a believer in astrology is because I always like to refer back to past events and be like, well, is it true? Did that happen back then? And then when I compare the real life events to events of the past, and I see the timelines line up with the planets, that's when I become a believer. And when I'm like, there really is something to astrology through tracking our transiting planets, our progressed planets. And I think that's empowering, because even though it's kind of saying like, okay, well, if you're in a Scorpio theme, these are themes that you may experience. But if you're aware of it ahead of time and you understand the themes of those lessons, I believe it's like going into the situation with open eyes instead of completely eyes closed, have no idea what's happening. So in a sense, if you're going into a situation with open eyes and you know what to expect, and you start noticing it happening right in front of you, it's a lot easier to say, oh, okay, I understand why this is happening. This is what I'm learning from it. The lesson here is for me to step into my power, to learn to stop giving it away to black magic practitioners and men that I'm dating and these gatekeepers of fame and comedy shows. Stop giving my power away to them. That was also another reason why I learned to start producing my own shows and throwing my own adoption events for dogs, because I realized I can do what these people are doing, except I'm not going to be the gatekeeper who's going to try to make people sleep with me to get on a show or whatever, or like make people work for free. I have a really good friend in the comedy industry now who also started to recognize that in herself. So I was also able to witness other people stand up to corruption in our local comedy scene and start producing their own shows in a way that was empowering to the artists on the shows. Like, she's so awesome. She makes sure that the comedians get paid. She makes sure like she doesn't take SHIT from these people who think they know everything because they're industry veterans. So this is like the stuff that warms my heart, that I think, well, there's a purpose and a reason why you know, God or the universe will put us in certain situations, not only so we can learn from it, but maybe so we can affect the people around us too. So I know that crossing paths with her, like I think we inspired each other to be who we are today and like what we're doing now. So like I always say, nothing is wasted in God's economy. Everything I think happens for a reason. And astrology is just one of those tools for me that helps me connect the dots and helps me frame it in a new language that's more empowering. So that is why I like to share those tools with people today. And if you're interested in booking a reading, I do have all of the information in the links in my description. I also have playlists for you if you want to explore any of these topics further in detail. And I do have an ESP development course and remote viewing mastery course. And those are designed to help you really step into your full power and to start learning how to trust your intuition and to create strong energetic boundaries so you're not going to fall victim to these people who are out here trying to manipulate you or groom you or take your power away. So anyways, thank you for watching this video, and I hope somebody learned something and it was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.